take a look at question number 2. With reference to the background information on page 1, describe the sources of information that you will utilize to obtain an understanding of the entity and its environment that will enable you to plan the audit of combat. We spoke briefly about the tricks or the things you need to be aware of in this particular question and the importance of reading this question properly. I said that you've got to be careful about using the word or reading the word plan and thinking that this is a question on the audit plan, because it's not. The key words here is the source of information that you're going to use to obtain an understanding of the entity and its environment. And the understanding of the entity and its environment is obviously, as I mentioned before, from ISA 315, what we call the risk assessment standard. If you take a look at the heading of ISA 315, you'll see that it's called the identifying and assessing the risks of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So what we've got here is a situation where we have to identify where we're going to get our information to do the risk assessment so that we can plan the audit. We cannot plan the audit without understanding what's going on in the company and the environment as well. So in order to do this question, there is a set of theory that you need to take a look at, and that theory you'll find in ISA 315. You'll find it in paragraph 11. You'll find paragraph 12, 13, and probably one or two more. You'll find they talk about the information that you should obtain. So in those paragraphs, go and take a look at them, and they'll say you need to get regulatory information, you need to get information about strategy of the company, financing, the structure, etc., etc. So there is some theory that goes in there, and there's quite a long list of stuff that they say in the standard that you should be aware of. Obviously, our concern in the exam is, do you know that theory? And do you know enough to get your 21 marks? And that obviously is where the drama, or that's where the risk lies. So let's, to begin with, assume that you don't really know your theory that well and that you can't think of that list, and you maybe don't even know that that list exists. Let's go back to some basics and see whether or not we can get marks for this without knowing our theory. The sources of information they talk about is basically asking you where, right? Where do you get the information? Where do you get the information to get an understanding of the entity? How are you actually going to go about figuring out what this entity is about and the environment? We're focusing on the background information again. So we're looking at the background information, and if we look at this, is there any way we can pull marks out of this case study by simply understanding what it is that they want from us? They're asking, where will you find information about this company and what they do, the environment that they operate in, and the company itself? Keep in mind that when we talk about the entity, and a lot of people put these two together, right? And because it's something we hear all the time, environment. Because it's a phrase that we hear all the time, a lot of students put this together, entity and its environment. And that obviously is a bad idea. These are two separate things, and we need to be aware of that. The entity itself is obviously looking at the business itself. Okay, looking at the business, the manufacturing or the retail service, whatever the case is, the way that the business is structured, managed, financed, what's going on in the business itself. And the environment is dealing with the greater, sort of the environment or the economy around it. So industry regulations that guide the environment, any external stuff that we need to be aware of. If there's a possibility that competition is going to affect your company, your business, is there a possibility that the economy, stuff that's going on outside and around the country, the government, that type of thing, investment things and opportunities in and around your environment. So this is basically, if you want to sort of simplify it, you can talk about the environment as the external stuff that may affect your client, whereas the entity is the internal stuff. So what you're looking for when we talk about the information, what they want to know is where are you going to get information about what's going on in the business, and where are you going to get information about what's going on outside the business that may impact the business itself. Obviously, the industry is going to impact the business, right? Rules and regulations around the business is going to impact the business. Competition in the market is going to impact the business. The economy in which the business operates is going to impact the entity. So keep in mind that these two are separate things, and obviously that's where your marks, or a lot of your marks, can come from as well. So Combat is listed on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. If you're looking at this, perhaps the easiest way to do this is to ask, is this information that I would need in order to understand either the business or the environment that it operates in? So literally line by line, let's see whether or not we can identify and get marks for stuff that's written in the case study itself. So Combat is listed on the JSE, the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. Is that information that we would need in order to understand the entity and its environment? Absolutely, okay? There's no question that if they're listed, they're governed by the rules of the JSE. So in terms of that, I'm just going to write a little info above that so we know that we need that, right? So information on the JSE. And it operates in the pharmaceutical industry. That's also information that I need. Where raw materials are converted into a finished product. This gives you information. Remember, we mentioned that we realize that the company is a manufacturing company. So if we're looking at this, is this information that I would need to understand about the industry or about this particular company? Yes. Is this different from the industry? Absolutely. The pharmaceutical industry is external information about what's going on in the industry, requirements of the industry, etc. The fact that they're a manufacturing organization doesn't necessarily mean that that's entirely covered in the pharmaceutical industry, because you could be in the service industry, or you could be in the service environment in the pharmaceutical industry. You could be in retail distribution. This company is in manufacturing. So their processes, the way that they convert raw materials into finished goods, is going to be different to the industry. So if you look at it, we're looking at the industry as an external, but the business and the manufacturing process would be internal. So those would be two different sets of information that we would need. The pharmaceutical industry has very specific rules and regulations. Again, information that I need to know. Would it impact the business, and would I need to know about it as an auditor? Yes. Which are regulated by numerous acts and governing bodies. Their primary goal is to successfully sell their medicine to clinics and hospitals throughout South Africa and other African countries. In terms of their operations, no question that we're interested in the information about how they operate. Their manufacturing information is one thing, but their operations, national and international, may be something else. And if their primary goal is something, it gives you an indication of what they are focused on. So again, a set of information that would be useful to us. Combat is a new audit client of XYZ Incorporated. Mr. Douglas is the managing partner of XYZ and the partner in charge of the audit. Does that, or do those sentences provide any information, or do they provide any indication of information about the entity itself and about the environment they operate in? Not necessarily. There's not a lot that we can gain from that. The audit firm has 2 partners and 5 professional staff members, renders audit services mainly in the mining industry. Is there any information there that impacts the entity information or the environment in which the entity operates? No, that's about us as auditors, not my client. The directors of Combat requested that the audit should be completed within 2 weeks of the financial year, which places the auditor under extreme pressure. Is there anything here that gives us an indication about the entity and its environment that we would need to be aware of? I would say yes. It's a little indirect, if you will, but the fact that the audit needs to be completed within 2 weeks of the financial year gives us information about their deadlines. Okay, their reporting deadlines and their deadlines that they need to meet, and subsequently those are going to be deadlines that we need to meet as well. So understanding our reporting requirements from our client is going to be information we need as well, which places us under pressure. That is information that affects me as an auditor, not my client's entity and their environment. XYZ was appointed as the auditor via a tender process after the previous auditors resigned. Information that may impact me or impact the entity and its environment there's a possibility you could say information from the previous auditor would be important for me to identify and understand what's going on at the company or around the company. The fact that Mr. Douglas was a close school friend of the CEO was the deciding factor in our being successful, or in XYZ being successful in its bid, doesn't really give me any indication of the entity and the environment. Mr. Douglas informed you to take extra care in performing the audit since he has a significant shareholding. Again, that's more about us as an audit firm rather than the client. According to the directors, the previous auditors resigned due to a disagreement concerning the accounting treatment of revenue recognized from a contract to manufacture and supply TB medicine to government hospitals for a 5-year period. Would this be information that I need? I think yes. In terms of the selection process of my clients' accounting policies and their management process, or the process in which they go through that may be information that definitely affects my client's entity and their reporting. The directors refused to elaborate on the matter and further rejected our request to obtain the previous auditor's report. We've already spoken about how that would affect my pre-engagement activities, and there is a risk, but in terms of the information itself, we have already discussed the need to obtain that information. They declined our permission to contact the previous auditors. One of the employees recently indicated that the directors receive bonuses based on profits. Is that information that we need to know? Again, slightly indirectly, but it is something that leads towards that. If there is specific information that impacts how stuff is calculated, in this case, the directors' bonuses, there's going to be quite an importance on how they actually measure their performance, right? So if the directors' bonuses are based on their profits, it means that the profits and the way that those profits are calculated, in other words, the performance measurement, is going to be quite important for us to realize. So I would definitely want to know about how exactly they measure those profits and how they do their performance measurements. A week before the financial year end, a newspaper reported that Combat manufactured and supplied new medicine to local clinics without it being approved by the Medicine Control Council of South Africa. Is this information that would impact my client, the entity and environment? There's no question. We've spoken already about the legal and regulatory requirements up front over here, so I wouldn't necessarily repeat that, because obviously this falls under the laws and regulations. But I would say that in terms of the specific issue, I would like to get more information about that. So whether it's more media reports identifying what's going on in the environment or the industry and relating to my client. So there's a possibility I may want to do some research into media releases and media information. But I also want to explore this information a little more in terms of what's happening with this particular legal issue. Is there anything going on? Has an illegal issue arisen here? Are they fighting some kind of court case? They might therefore face severe penalties, which could threaten their ability to continue as a going concern, basically. So this may impact their future. Is there a possibility that this is something that we need to be aware of? No question that this penalty and the possible penalty or the possible issues that they may face here is information that I want to know. So basically what I've done, and you'll see that this isn't going to match and align perfectly with the solution, but what I'm trying to do is say that if you read your required properly and you think about what it is they want from you, there's a possibility that you could get marks for the stuff that's mentioned in the case study. You can use the case study to lead you towards the answer. What we've identified and what we've asked you at every point, and what I'm trying to get you to do, is to look at each set of information and go, is this information that I would need to know in order to plan the audit? Is this something that would impact the way I think about the entity as well as its environment? Some of the other marks are going to come from theoretical stuff that you may not know if you're not aware and you're not fully comfortable with the theory, but our intention here is, can we pass the exam by what we do know and our practical issues and the practicality of what we do know?